Race is a recent invention. It's just a few hundred years old. Before that, yes, people divided themselves by religion, tribal group, language, things like that. But for most of human history, people had no notion of race. In ancient Greece, for example, and I learned this from the historian Nell Irvin Painter, the Greeks thought they were better than the other people they knew about, but not because of some idea that they were innately superior. They just thought they'd developed the most advanced culture. So they looked around at, the Ethiopians, but also the Persians and the Celts, and they said, they're all kind of barbaric compared to us. Culturally, they're just not Greek, right? And yes, in the ancient world, there was lots of slavery, but people enslaved people who didn't look like them, and they often enslaved people who did. Did you know that the English word slave is derived from the word Slav? Because Slavic people were enslaved by all kinds of folks, including Western Europeans, for centuries, right? Slavery wasn't about race either, because no one had thought up race yet. So who did? I put that question to another leading historian, Ibram Kendi. I didn't expect he would answer the question in the form of one person's name and a date, as if we were talking about the light bulb. But he did. He said in his exhaustive research, he found what he believed to be the first articulation of racist ideas. And he named the culprit. This guy should be more famous or infamous. His name is Gomes de Zurara. Portuguese man, wrote a book in the 1450s in which he did something that no one had ever done before, according to Dr. Kendi. He lumped together all of the people of Africa, vast, diverse continent, and he described them as a distinct group, inferior and beastly. Never mind that in that pre-colonial time, some of the most sophisticated cultures in the world were in Africa. Why would this guy make this claim? Turns out it helps to follow the money. First of all, Zurara was hired to write that book by the Portuguese king. And just a few years before, slave traders, here we go, slave traders tied to the Portuguese crown had effectively pioneered the Atlantic slave trade. They were the first Europeans to sail directly to sub-Saharan Africa to kidnap and enslave African people. So it was suddenly really helpful to have a story about the inferiority of African people, to justify this new trade, to other people, to the church, to themselves. And with the stroke of a pen, Zurara invented both blackness and whiteness, because he basically created the notion of blackness through this description of Africans. And as Dr. Kendi says, blackness has no meaning without whiteness. Other European countries followed the Portuguese lead in looking to Africa for human property and free labor, and in adopting this fiction about the inferiority of African people. I found this clarifying. Racism didn't start with a misunderstanding, it started with a lie. Meanwhile, over here in colonial America, the people now calling themselves white got busy taking these racist ideas and turning them into law. Laws that stripped all human rights from the people they were calling black and locking them into our particularly vicious brand of chattel slavery. And laws that gave even the poorest white people benefits, not big benefits in material terms, but the right to not be enslaved for life, the right to not have your loved ones torn from your arms and sold, and sometimes real goodies, the handouts of free land to white places like Virginia, to white people only, started long before the American Revolution and continued long after. Now, I can imagine there are would be people listening to me, if they're still listening, who might be thinking, oh, come on, this is all ancient history. Why does this matter? Things have changed. Can't we just get over it and move on? Right? But I would argue, for me, certainly, learning this history has brought a real shift in the way that I understand racism today. To review, 2 quick takeaways from what I've said so far. 1, race is not a thing biologically. It's a story some people decided to tell. And 2, people told that story to justify the brutal exploitation of other human beings for profit. I didn't learn those 2 facts in school. I suspect most of us didn't. If you did, you had a special teacher, right? But once they sink in, for one thing, it becomes clear that racism is not mainly a problem of attitudes, of individual bigotry. No, it's a tool. It's a tool to divide us and to prop up systems, economic, political, and social systems that advantage some people and disadvantage others. And it's a tool to convince a lot of white folks who may or may not be getting a great deal out of our highly stratified society to support the status quo. Could be worse, at least I'm white. Once I grasped the origins of racism, I stopped being mystified by the fact that it's still with us. I guess, looking back, I thought about racism as being sort of like the flat earth, just bad, outdated thinking that would fade away on its own before long. But now this tool of whiteness is still doing the job it was invented to do. Powerful people go to work every day leveraging and reinforcing this old weapon in the halls of power, in some broadcast studios we could mention. And we don't need to fuss over whether these people believe what they're saying, whether they're really racist. That's not what it's about. It's about pocketbooks and power. Finally, I think the biggest lesson of all, and let me talk in particular to the white folks for a minute. Once we understand that people who look like us invented the very notion of race in order to advantage themselves and us, isn't it easier to see that it's our problem to solve? It's a white people problem.